You know, there is this really legendary story about the baseball pitcher Satchel Paige that I think perfectly frames what we are doing today.
Oh, I love this story.
Right. So good. So, for decades, Page was just this completely indestructible force on the mound. I mean, he started pitching in the Negro Leagues when he was 17 and he just kept going.
Just endless stamina,
Exactly. And as the years rolled by, he became purposefully, almost playfully vague about exactly how old he was.
which, obviously drove the press crazy.
Oh, totally crazy. So finally, this sports writer manages to corner him and bluntly asks, like, Satchel, how old are you?
And his response is just classic.
It really is. Paige just looks at him and says, how old would you be if you didn't know how old you was?
It's honestly a brilliant piece of philosophy, disguised as a clever comeback.
Yeah, exactly.
Because what Page was getting at is that profound disconnect between the chronological number society pins on us and the internal subjective experience of actually living in our own bodies.
Right.
He was basically pointing out that age is largely a script that society just hands to us.
And that script is exactly what we're tearing apart in this deep dive.
Yes, we are.
Because today, we're going on a journey to find the hidden meaning in old age. We're going to start by looking at how modern society tries to, well, essentially erase the reality of aging altogether.
Which is a huge issue.
Huge. And then we'll move into the really profound question of what we do with our time when those traditional roles of midlife just fall away.
The whole shift in leisure time.
Exactly. And from there, we'll explore the unexpected ways our minds and our spiritual lives adapt to a failing physical body.
That inward turn.
Right, the inward turn. And ultimately, we're going to descend into the raw, deeply personal diaries of people who are actually living through this final chapter.
The philosophers.
Yes, the philosophers. We are pointing all of this at one intimidating question, really. Does old age actually have its own unique intrinsic meaning, or is it just the fading tail end of midlife?
Well, to even ask that question requires a bit of historical perspective.
How so?
Because, contemplating the meaning of old age is a remarkably recent luxury in human history. And it's a uniquely human trait.
Right, because animals don't really do this.
Exactly. In the natural world, survival is the only metric. Young animals reach physical maturity, they leave the nest, and the parental bond usually just dissolves.
It's just biology doing its thing.
But human beings operate entirely differently. We live in a symbolic world. We operate on shared meaning, collective memory, and, well, an awareness of our own mortality.
We honor our dead and we care for our elders.
We do. But the scale of that care has changed dramatically, hasn't it?
Entirely. I mean, throughout most of human history, living into deep old age was an anomaly.
A total statistical miracle.
Right. You might have a few elders in a village, and they were often revered simply because surviving to 80 was so rare.
But then, the 20th century happens. We get antibiotics, better sanitation, modern medicine.
A total demographic revolution.
Exactly. Suddenly, for the first time ever, a massive, sizable proportion of the human population is actually surviving to experience old age.
So we basically engineered a new stage of life and then completely panicked about how to handle it.
That is precisely what happened. We created this entirely new, universal phase of the human life cycle, but we didn't create a societal blueprint for what to do with it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because you look at modern culture, especially in the West, and the primary mechanism for dealing with aging seems to be a desperate, coordinated effort to deny its existence.
Oh, absolutely. Just look at the messaging.
Right. I mean, the cosmetic industry, the plastic surgery industry, the sheer volume of marketing, it all revolves around this central thesis that aging is a disease to be cured.
Or at least aggressively covered up.
Yeah. The underlying message isn't just about looking good. It's this really insidious idea that successful aging means successfully pretending you aren't aging at all.
And that creates a tremendous psychological burden.
I have to imagine.
Because when the cultural ideal is basically an imitation of youth, any visible sign of aging becomes a personal failure.
A moral failure, almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this denial isn't just vanity, right? It infiltrates how we structure society entirely.
We push older adults out of the workforce.
We marginalize them in media. We essentially tell them that their value is directly proportional to how well they can mimic a 40-year-old.
Which is exhausting. George Bernard Shaw had a pretty definitive take on that trap, actually.
Yeah. What did he say?
Well, when he was in his 90s, he was asked if he had advice for younger people. And he replied, "Do not try to live forever. You will not succeed."
I mean, he's not wrong.
No, he's spot on. But because the cultural obsession with youth is so overwhelming, the scientific and medical communities realized they needed a healthier framework.
Right, they needed a new model.
Yeah. So in the late 80s and 90s, you saw the introduction of models like John Rowe and Robert Kahn's concept of successful aging.
Ah, yes. Rowe and Kahn.
They tried to move the goalposts. They argued that success wasn't about finding the fountain of youth, but about three specific pillars.
Which were avoiding disease and disability,
Right.
maintaining high mental and physical function, and continuing your active engagement with life.
Now, on the surface, that was a massive step forward for gerontology.
It was. Rowe and Kahn were trying to shift the focus from merely extending lifespan to expanding health span.
Making those extra years actually livable.
Exactly. They wanted to optimize human capacity, emphasizing that lifestyle choices, exercise, and cognitive challenges could keep someone vibrant well into their 80s and 90s.
It's an empowering message.
It really is. It countered the old stereotype that aging was just this inevitable passive slide into decrepitude.
Sure, I understand the clinical value of that. It's
Yeah.
obviously better to be healthy and active than sick and isolated. But taking a step back, I mean, this concept of successful aging feels a bit like a trap of its own.
How so?
Well, it feels like a repackaged version of the midlife hustle, you know?
Oh, I see what you mean.
If we define a successful 80-year-old strictly by how healthy, sharp, and productive they are, aren't we just demanding that they continue to perform the same roles they did in middle age?
You're hitting on a major critique within sociology right there.
Really?
Yeah, because by framing it as successful aging, we implicitly create a category of unsuccessful aging.
Right.
If someone develops arthritis or experiences cognitive decline or simply loses the energy to be highly socially engaged, have they failed at old age?
That's a terrible way to look at it.
It is. The Rowe and Kahn model, for all its benefits, is deeply rooted in Western capitalist values. It prizes productivity, independence, and relentless activity above all else.
Exactly. It's as if society views old age as a role-less
A
role.
role-less role, yes.
Think about it. When you are a child, your role is clear. Go to school, grow up.
Right.
When you are an adult, your role is to work, produce, and raise a family. But when you hit retirement, society strips those roles away and replaces them with an unspoken directive to just stay out of the way.
Take it easy, but also somehow remain incredibly vibrant and independent so you aren't a burden.
Right. If the only way to win at this role-less role is to hustle like you're still in midlife, we are completely robbing old age of any unique developmental identity.
We're just treating it as a defective version of youth.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here is that this creates a really profound psychological dissonance, which shows up constantly in gerontological data.
What kind of dissonance?
Well, when researchers interview older adults and ask them how old they feel, a staggering percentage of them will say that, barring a severe illness or a bout of depression, they simply don't feel old.
Wow, really?
Yeah. They look in the mirror and are genuinely surprised by the wrinkles and the gray hair because internally they possess an ageless self.
Right, the Satchel Paige phenomenon. How old would you be if you didn't know how old you was?
Precisely. Their core identity, their sense of humor, their values, their internal monologue feels identical to when they were 30.
That's wild to think about.
It is. So the fundamental question gerontologists wrestle with is this. Is personal meaning in old age just more of the same?
Just hanging on to the past.
Yeah. Is the goal just to stubbornly maintain your midlife identity against the eroding tide of physical decline? Or is there a distinct, specific psychological task to this final stage that we completely overlook because we are so busy praising the people who still run marathons at 85?
That distinction, whether we are just killing time or actually entering a new developmental phase, becomes incredibly urgent when you look at the sheer mathematics of retirement.
The time aspect.
Yes, the time. If the traditional work role falls away, a massive vacuum opens up.
It really does.
The American Time Use Survey provides some staggering numbers on this. People 75 years of age and older have an average of 7.8 hours of completely discretionary leisure time every single day.
Nearly 8 hours.
That is nearly 8 hours of unstructured reality to navigate. That's more than any other age group.
And how people navigate that void is largely determined by the resources they carried into it.
What do you mean by resources?
Well, society has a very flattened, cliché view of elderly leisure, right? We picture shuffleboard, bingo, sitting in a rocking chair on the porch.
Right, the typical retirement home brochure.
Exactly. But sociological data shatters that stereotype. Leisure patterns in later life are heavily dictated by education, lifelong habits, and income, not just age.
That makes sense.
Someone who is deeply engaged in literature, travel, or civic organizing at 40 is likely to seek out similar, rich engagements at 80, provided they have the physical and financial means to do so.
That falls in line with what sociologists call continuity theory, right?
Yes, exactly.
The idea that we basically maintain our core behavioral patterns and just adapt them slightly as we age. Like if you love to garden, you keep gardening, maybe just build raised beds so you don't have to bend over as much.
Continuity theory is very popular because it makes intuitive sense. It suggests a smooth psychological glide path.
But there's another side to this, right?
There is. It stands in contrast to another major framework, which is disengagement theory.
Oh, this is the controversial one.
Very. When this theory was first proposed in the 1960s, it argued that there is a natural mutual withdrawal between the aging individual and society.
Meaning society pulls back from them.
Society steps back to allow the younger generation to take over, and the older individual voluntarily steps back to prepare for the ultimate disengagement of death.
I mean, that sounds incredibly bleak. It frames isolation as a biological imperative.
And was heavily criticized for exactly that reason. It sounded like an excuse to marginalize the elderly.
Oh, they want to be alone. Let's just ignore them.
Exactly. But modern longitudinal studies, like the Canadian Longitudinal Study of Aging, have nuanced this idea significantly.
What did they find?
They found that disengagement isn't a universal, inevitable slide into a dark room. It is highly selective. It's a mechanism called selective optimization with compensation.
Selective optimization. So, meaning they don't just give up on life, they just get very picky about where they spend their dwindling energy.
Exactly that. An older adult might disengage from large, noisy social gatherings because their hearing isn't what it used to be and the environment is exhausting.
Makes total sense.
But they will optimize their remaining energy to have deep one-on-one conversations with a close friend over coffee. They drop the superficial engagements to protect the meaningful ones.
So it's about quality over quantity.
Right. As long as activities remain accessible and rewarding, people will participate. They only withdraw when physical or environmental barriers force them to.
But looking at that 7.8 hours of daily leisure, I keep wondering, does leisure actually replace the work role? Like, can a hobby offer the same deep sense of purpose that raising a family or building a career did?
It's a tough comparison.
To me, it feels like we have to categorize leisure the same way we categorize a diet.
Oh, that's an interesting analogy.
Well, think about it. There are passive activities, and the data shows that television viewing eats up a massive portion of those 8 hours for many older adults.
It really does.
That feels like empty calories to me. It passes the time, it numbs the boredom, but it doesn't nourish the psyche.
It is a distraction from the void rather than a fulfillment of it.
Right, but then you have developmental leisure. This isn't just playing bingo. This is taking up a complex musical instrument, diving into local political advocacy, or studying a new language.
Something that requires effort.
Yes, developmental leisure has an architecture to it. Each hour spent builds a foundation for the next hour. There's a trajectory of growth.
I see where you're going.
If those 7.8 hours are going to provide genuine meaning, if they are going to be more than just running out the clock, they have to involve some dimension of personal, continuous evolution.
That is definitely the ideal scenario. But the practical reality of aging often wages war against developmental leisure.
The physical limitations?
Yeah, we cannot ignore the friction of physical decline. Declining mobility, age-related vision or hearing loss, and fixed incomes create massive barriers to that kind of active outward engagement.
It's hard to learn the piano if your hands have arthritis.
Exactly. But the most devastating barrier isn't physical. It is social. It is the steady, unavoidable loss of peers, siblings, and spouses.
Oh man, the Pew Research Center has data on this that is just heartbreaking.
The isolation statistics.
Yeah, they found that older adults, on average, spend half of their waking hours completely alone.
Half their waking hour.
Half of their conscious existence is spent in solitude. It's staggering.
Which means that relying entirely on outward, active leisure is a very fragile strategy for meaning.
Because it depends on external factors.
Right. If your entire sense of purpose is tied up in a bowling league or traveling or going to the theater, what happens when your knees give out or you lose your driving privileges or the friends you did those things with pass away?
The external scaffolding collapses.
It completely collapses.
And that raises the most critical pivot point in the human lifespan, I think. When the body won't let you engage in the outside world and the social circle shrinks, Where do you go to find purpose?
You have to go somewhere.
The inevitable answer is that you have to turn inward. And this brings us into the realm of religion, spirituality, and the internal life.
Which is a huge part of the aging process.
Massive. Statistically, we know this is a huge component. Gallup polling consistently shows that over 72% of U.S. adults consider religion to be an important part of their lives.
And that importance tends to peak in later life.
Right, exactly. But what is fascinating from the sources is how that religious engagement actually looks in practice. It's not as simple as an 80-year-old just going to church more often.
No, not at all. In fact, the physical reality of aging forces a transformation in how faith is practiced.
How so?
Sociologists call this multidimensional disengagement, and it is a brilliant example of how older adults adapt to their limitations.
Multidimensional disengagement.
Yeah. As people enter their late 70s and 80s, you actually see a measurable decline in formal organizational religious behavior.
Wait, really?
Yeah. They stop attending Sunday services, they step down from the parish council, they aren't at the weekly potlucks.
But it's not a crisis of faith, right? They aren't becoming atheists.
Not at all. It is purely a logistical retreat. They are frail, they can't drive at night, or the physical act of getting dressed and navigating a crowded sanctuary is just too exhausting.
The friction is too high.
Exactly. But as they withdraw from the public performative sphere of religion, they drastically intensify their private internal practices.
So it shifts inward.
The statistics show a sharp increase in the frequency of personal prayer, meditation, reading scripture at home, and listening to religious broadcasts.
So if they can't travel to the physical cathedral, they meticulously construct the cathedral in their own minds.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
And what's interesting is that this inward turn isn't restricted to traditional Orthodox religions. The source material talks about a massive surge in what is broadly termed the conscious aging movement.
Yes, the conscious aging movement.
This is a demographic that is blending traditional faith with humanistic psychology. They are reading Abraham Maslow and pursuing peak experiences.
They're seeking self-actualization.
Right. They are utilizing Eastern practices like Zen meditation or mindfulness. The objective isn't just to find comfort in the face of death. It is an active, intentional pursuit of self-actualization. They are treating late life as a distinct laboratory for spiritual growth.
And this concept, that old age is specifically designed for spiritual growth, is something that Western culture is really only just beginning to grasp.
Whereas other cultures have known this for centuries.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Other global traditions have built their entire societal framework around it. Take traditional Hinduism, for instance.
These are shamas, right?
Yes, the four ashramas, or stages of life. In this worldview, the life cycle is brilliantly compartmentalized.
Break that down for us.
Well, the first stage is the student, focused entirely on learning and discipline.
Makes sense.
The second stage is the householder, where you accumulate wealth, marry, raise children, and fulfill your civic duties. That is the stage Western society prioritizes above all else.
We basically want everyone to be a householder forever.
Exactly. We cling to it.
Yeah.
But in the Hindu framework, once your children are grown and your hair turns gray, you are supposed to abandon the householder role.
You move on.
You enter the third stage, the forest dweller. You literally or metaphorically retreat from the noise of commerce and societal ambition to focus on reading scripture and contemplation.
Wow.
And finally, the fourth stage is the sannyasi, the complete renunciate, who gives up all worldly attachments to focus entirely on spiritual liberation, or moksha. Old age is not a decline here. It is the absolute pinnacle of human development.
That completely inverts our paradigm. We look at an elderly person sitting quietly and assume they are bored or depressed.
We pity them.
Right, but the Hindu framework looks at them and sees someone doing the highest work possible. And you see echoes of this societal validation in Japan, too, with the concept of ikigai.
Ikigai.
It translates roughly to that which makes life worth living, or the core purpose that gets you out of bed in the morning. It's so deeply embedded in their culture that the Japanese government actively integrates the philosophy of ikigai into national health policies.
To help citizens navigate life beyond age 80.
Exactly. They recognize that a body without a purpose deteriorates faster.
But this brings us back to a vital question regarding the psychology of the West.
What's that?
When an older person in America or Europe turns inward, when they start meditating or praying intensely, what is actually happening in their brain?
Oh, I see.
Is this spiritual intensity just a highly evolved psychological coping mechanism? Is it just a way to soothe the anxiety of chronic pain and the grief of losing spouses?
So what does this all mean? Is it just a coping mechanism, or is it a genuine hardwired developmental leap that humans are meant to take?
Well, if you look at the foundational theories of developmental psychology, particularly the work of Erik Erikson, the answer is definitively the latter.
A developmental leap?
Yes, this isn't just a coping mechanism. This inward turn is the final, ultimate psychological exam of a human life.
Erikson had those stages, right?
Right. Erikson believed that human development didn't stop at adolescence or midlife. He mapped out a series of psychosocial crises that we have to resolve at every stage of life.
And for old age?
For old age, he defined the ultimate conflict as ego integrity versus despair.
Ego integrity versus despair, that sounds intense.
It is a profound framework. Ego integrity is the difficult, often painful process of looking back on the totality of your life. Every triumph, every catastrophic mistake, every missed opportunity, every moment of grace, and finding a way to accept it.
Make peace with it.
Exactly. It is the realization that your life, for all its flaws, was yours, and it had meaning. You accept your history without wishing you could go back and rewrite the script.
And the alternative is terrifying.
Despair.
Right. Despair, in Erikson's model, is the realization that the clock has run out, the physical energy is gone, and you cannot reconcile with the choices you made. It is the feeling that life was wasted, punctuated by a deep, paralyzing fear of death, which is often masked by bitterness or contempt for the younger generation.
And achieving that ego integrity isn't a passive event. It requires immense psychological labor.
It's hard work.
Later in his life, Erikson collaborated with his wife Joan and a psychologist named Helen Kivnick to really flesh out what this looks like in practice. They argued that elders who achieve integrity become something vital to the survival of the species.
What's that?
They become preservers of collective memory.
Wow, that framing changes everything. They aren't just retired workers, they are the anchors of our shared history.
Exactly.
Erikson wrote about how elders possess a reservoir of strength in the well springs of history and storytelling. Because they have survived the long arc of time, they have the unique capacity to pass on a stable, collective identity to the frantic, forward-looking younger generations.
They also noted that older people naturally become the ultimate conservationists.
Oh, that's an interesting point from the text.
Yeah. When you have an 80-year memory, you feel the loss of the physical world acutely. You remember what the river looked like before the factory was built. You remember the unpaved roads and the open fields.
Whereas a 20-year-old only knows the concrete.
Right, so they don't know what they've lost. Society desperately needs the long-range grief and the long-range memory of the elderly to guide its moral and ecological judgments.
There is also a deeply personal internal balancing act that Erikson observed, particularly regarding gender roles.
The blurring of those lines.
Yeah. Over the course of a lifetime, men and women are often forced into very rigid societal scripts. Men are taught to be fiercely independent, stoic, and competitive in the capitalist arena.
And women have historically been expected to be the nurturers.
Right, the weavers of the social fabric, deeply comfortable with interdependence. But in late life, those rigid walls begin to dissolve.
They soften.
Exactly. Men, stripped of their competitive work roles, often soften. They become more capable of expressing tenderness and accepting the interdependence they fought against for 50 years.
And conversely, older women often step into a space of vigorous independence.
Yes.
Having spent decades nurturing others, they frequently become highly active in worldly affairs, community organizing, or simply fiercely protecting their own autonomy.
There is a holistic evening out of the human experience. We finally integrate the masculine and feminine aspects of our psyche.
But the hurdle to that integration, particularly for men in Western culture, is the concept of physical dependence.
Right, because we hate asking for help.
We are so conditioned to view independence as the ultimate virtue that needing help to bathe or eat or walk is viewed as a profound personal failure.
It's seen as shameful.
Exactly. To achieve Erikson's ego integrity, you have to do something completely countercultural. You have to trust in interdependence.
The psychological literature uses a brilliant analogy here, drawn from the myth of Oedipus and the riddle of the Sphinx.
Oh, I love this analogy.
The Sphinx asks what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening. The answer, of course, is a human being who crawls as a baby, walks upright as an adult, and uses a cane in old age.
The third leg.
Right. But the psychological insight here is this. When the body inevitably falters, pride can be an asset, but it cannot be a cane.
That is so profound.
You cannot lean your physical weight on your pride. It will break.
Exactly. You have no choice but to accept the third leg, which is often the physical support and compassion of another human being.
Which is hard.
Very hard. Rejecting that help out of stubbornness leads straight to Erickson's despair. Accepting it with grace, recognizing that humans are inherently social creatures who are meant to care for one another, is a massive psychological triumph.
So how does an individual actually do this work? Like, how do you process a lifetime of memories to reach that state of grace?
Well, this brings us to a specific clinical concept developed by the psychiatrist Robert Butler. It's known as the life review. Butler argued that as people become aware of their approaching mortality, it triggers a natural, almost involuntary psychological process.
The mind just starts doing it.
Yeah. The mind begins to progressively return to past experiences.
But it is not just casual reminiscing, is it?
No. The life review is an active excavation. The mind brings up old, unresolved conflicts. The fight with a sibling 40 years ago, the career path abandoned, the parenting mistakes made.
All heavy stuff.
All of it. It brings them to the surface so the individual can survey them, process the guilt or anger with the maturity of an 80-year-old brain, and finally integrate them. The goal is to give new significance to the past, to tie off the loose threads of the narrative.
I hear that, but I want to inject a bit of skepticism here, because in practice, this seems incredibly risky.
How do you mean?
Well, is spending massive amounts of your time excavating the past actually adaptive, or is it a psychological trap? We all know someone who seems entirely stuck in the past, constantly talking about their glory days or nursing decades-old grudges.
Right, the person who won't let go.
Yeah. If an elder is spending their 7.8 hours of leisure time just looping through old memories, aren't they completely abandoning the present moment? At what point does the life review devolve into pure escapism?
That is a very active debate within gerontology. There's a fine line between integration and rumination.
Rumination is dangerous.
It is. Some psychologists warn that if the life review is characterized by obsessive regret, if the person cannot find forgiveness for themselves or others, it simply accelerates Erickson's despair. It becomes a trap of bitterness.
Like staring at a puzzle you know you can never finish.
Exactly. However, the majority of clinical evidence suggests that when navigated successfully, this reminiscence is a vital psychological defense mechanism.
It helps them.
Yes. It allows older adults to bolster their self-esteem by reminding themselves of the storms they have survived. It establishes solidarity with their generation.
But you have to do the work.
Right. It is difficult work, and whether it leads to peace or bitterness largely depends on the underlying philosophical disposition of the individual.
And that perfectly sets up the final, and to my mind, the most gripping part of this deep dive.
The journals.
Yes. We've talked about the sociological data, the time use surveys, and the clinical psychological frameworks, but none of that really captures what old age actually feels like from the inside.
You need the first-hand accounts for that.
Exactly. To understand the visceral texture of aging, we have to leave the clinical world behind and look at the raw, unfiltered journals of brilliant minds who are living through it. And the sources provide two philosophical titans who offer aggressively different answers to how we should face the end of the line.
The contrast is stark. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we begin with the French existentialist philosopher Simone de Beauvoir.
Simone de Beauvoir.
Yes. In her late 60s, she published a massive landmark study called The Coming of Age. And true to her existentialist roots, her perspective is one of fierce, unyielding defiance.
She does not hold back.
Not at all. She looks at the Western ideal of old age, the idea that it is a time of quiet, gentle serenity, and she completely shreds it.
She calls it a convenient lie.
A deeply hypocritical lie. Beauvoir argues that the adult working world projects innocence onto childhood and serenity onto old age for one incredibly cynical reason.
To make itself comfortable.
Exactly. If society can convince itself that the elderly are perfectly happy sitting in a rocking chair doing nothing, then society doesn't have to feel guilty about marginalizing them, ignoring them, and stripping them of their political and economic power.
Wow.
By labeling them serene, we're essentially giving ourselves permission to leave them out in the cold.
Beauvoir's honesty about the internal experience of aging is almost brutal to read. She describes old age as a state characterized by a frozen past and a limited future.
A frozen past and a limited future.
Think about the psychology of that. For your entire life, the horizon has always represented infinite possibility. You could always change careers, move to a new city, or reinvent yourself.
The world is your oyster.
Right. But eventually you look at the horizon and you see a boundary stone. You realize your future is no longer infinite. It is measured. Your plans are largely executed. Your life closes in around you, and society no longer requires your presence.
For many, that realization brings a paralyzing depression. They internalize society's message that they are now an inert object and they simply wait to die.
But not Beauvoir.
No. Beauvoir's solution to this existential paralysis is relentless, rebellious outward activity.
She refuses to go quietly.
Absolutely. She argues that the only way to retain your humanity when your body is failing and society is trying to erase you is to fight.
You have to push back.
You cannot find meaning by turning inward and accepting the void. You must actively engage with the outside world. She writes that only continued activity on behalf of new goals, new political causes, and new relationships will imbue our final days with meaning.
That's intense.
There is something profoundly heroic in her worldview. It is a refusal to sink below the human level, a refusal to become the insect that a capitalist society wishes to reduce you to once you stop producing wealth. That meaning is not found. It is actively, violently seized.
It is the ultimate philosophical articulation of do not go gentle into that good night.
It really is.
But as powerful as Beauvoir's defiance is, it demands a level of physical and mental energy that eventually, inevitably runs out.
You can't fight forever.
Exactly, and that is why the text offers this incredible contrast. Here's where it gets really interesting. This is where the exploration gets deeply intimate. We turn to the personal journals of Florida Scott Maxwell.
Gosh.
She was a playwright and Jungian psychoanalyst who documented her experience of aging into her 80s.
If Beauvoir's philosophy is an outward battle cry, Scott Maxwell's is a description of an intense internal crucible.
Exactly. And the very first thing she writes in her journal completely shatters the illusion of the sleepy, disengaged elder. She is sitting in her quiet room, and she is genuinely shocked by the sheer magnitude of her own internal life.
What does she write?
She writes, "Age puzzles me. I thought it was a quiet time, but my 80s are passionate. I grow more intense as I age."
It is a stunning admission, because it contradicts everything society expects.
It really does.
Scott Maxwell acknowledges the physical reality of her situation with total clarity. She describes her state as heroic helplessness.
Heroic helplessness.
Yeah, she knows her mobility is gone. She admits she is too frail to march in the streets or indulge in the moral fervor that Beauvoir demands. She's largely confined to her room, spending her days silently watching the light move across the wall.
So to an outside observer, she looks completely passive.
Totally passive.
But that physical confinement is just the external shell. The imagery she uses to describe her internal state is breathtaking. She reveals the great hidden secret of the elderly.
The wildlife.
Yes. She writes that while she may appear to the outside world as drab outside wreckage to the eye, internally, she says, we flame with a wildlife that is almost incommunicable.
Wildlife. It is such a beautiful phrase. What she is articulating is the concept of the unlived life.
Tell us about that.
Every single human being, no matter how accomplished, harbors an unlived life. We all have potentials we never realized, passions we never pursued, alternative selves we had to abandon to make the practical choices of midlife.
Because we just don't have time.
Right. In our youth, we're too busy managing our careers, our children, and our absurdly small personalities to notice it.
But in old age, when the physical capacity to act out those passions is stripped away, that energy doesn't just evaporate.
It has to go somewhere.
Because you can no longer express it outwardly, it turns inward. And it becomes a source of fierce, almost overwhelming psychological heat. She realizes that her outward shell is cracking, but her inner consciousness is expanding.
It's an expansion.
She says, it is a place of fierce energy. Just life, the natural intensity of life. She isn't fighting against the boundaries of old age like Beauvoir. She has slipped beneath them into a state of profound clarity.
It is the ultimate realization of the Hindu forest dweller, or the peak of Erickson's ego integrity, documented in real time by a modern Western woman.
It's beautiful.
She has found meaning not in what she can do, but in the sheer concentrated intensity of what she is.
So we have covered a massive amount of territory today, from the sociological surveys of how we spend our time, to the psychological theories of Erikson, to the deeply personal journals of philosophers facing the end. If we pull all of these threads together, what is the ultimate truth we can extract from this deep dive?
Well, the clearest, most undeniable through line is that the meaning of old age is not a given.
Right.
It is not automatically granted to you by biology, and society is certainly not going to hand it to you. In fact, society's default setting is to strip your meaning away, tell you dye your hair, act young, and stay out of the way.
So you have to make it yourself.
Therefore, meaning in old age must be actively, consciously forged by the individual.
It is a deliberate act of creation. And the beauty is that there is no single right way to forge it.
Absolutely not.
You might find your meaning through structured, developmental leisure learning the piano at 75 and staying deeply tethered to your community.
Or you might find it through multidimensional disengagement.
Right. Slowly turning away from the noisy, performative world to cultivate a rich, silent spiritual landscape in your own mind.
You might embrace Erickson's call, taking on the heavy, vital responsibility of being a preserver of history, offering the long-range wisdom that a frantic society desperately needs.
Or you might choose Beauvoir's path of fierce outward defiance, fighting for justice until your last breath.
Or, you might find yourself in Florida Scott Maxwell's quiet room, simply sitting in awe of the fierce, wild energy of a life fully lived.
The crucial realization is that old age is not a waiting room. It is not a tragedy, and it is not just a defective version of youth.
It's its own thing entirely.
Yeah. It is a distinct, profound, and entirely unique frontier of human development, with its own specific tasks and its own intrinsic gravity. And realizing that changes the paradigm entirely.
It really does.
Whether you are listening to this trying to prepare for your own future decades down the line, or you are trying to better understand the older folks in your life right now, it forces a shift in perspective.
You see them differently.
The next time you see a retired parent or grandparent just sitting quietly, staring out the window, you might look at them differently. They aren't empty. They aren't necessarily bored. They might just be flaming with that incommunicable life.
It demands that we look past the physical wreckage to the eye and afford them the profound respect that the psychological and spiritual work of aging truly deserves.
And so, we want to leave you with a lingering thought, something for you to mull over long after you finish listening today. Imagine a future where the hustle is definitively over. Your career is behind you, your physical vitality has fundamentally changed, and society no longer demands a single thing from you. When all of that external noise, all the deadlines, the obligations, the titles, and the societal markers of success are entirely stripped away and you are left sitting alone in a quiet room, what exactly is the self that remains, and what will you choose to do with the fierce, wild energy inside it? Thank you for joining us on this exploration. We'll be back next time to unpack another stack of knowledge. Until then, keep diving deep.